All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Mint Collectibles. I am here with one of the architects of the modern Marvel cosmic universe, of the Warhammer novels, and currently of Valiant's RAI. We have Mr. Dan Abnett. How are you, sir?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We're going to just jump in. We have a couple of quick questions. We just wanted to pick your brain a little bit here. First of all, why do so many great writers come from the UK?
Oh, goodness me. It's something to do with poor diet and teeth, probably. I have no idea. I don't know. I think if I'm trying to analyze that question seriously, I think there's a very strong tradition of science fiction in the UK through things like 2000 AD and the other sort of mainstays of British comic publishing, which is obviously much smaller than American. So a lot of writers come up in here full of very, very inventive SF ideas, and therefore the lure of the American market is huge, where they get to write superheroes, which we don't tend to have here, and therefore maybe bringing to bear a kind of science fiction sensibility, which might mark them out. I'm not necessarily makes them better, but might make them sort of slightly more unusual, so that you see somebody and you go, oh, their work is unusual, and it turns out that it's British because it's got that sort of slightly strange cocktail of associations. Could be completely wrong. Could be brilliant at it. I don't know.
Totally makes sense, and it's half jokingly, but it's half serious, because there are so many great writers that come from the UK. And, you see the names on the comics, and then you come to realize, oh, man, this guy's from across the pond over there. So speaking of that, all writers, I mean, you have to have some kind of aha moment, some kind of book or something that sparked the interest in you to say, you know what, I want to try to give a shot at this and write my own thing.
In terms of comics, yes. Well, probably a number of them. But, I mean, I grew up, my parents were art teachers. I was always interested in art. So my favorite things to do when I was a kid was to draw pictures and write stories. I mean, simple as that. Those were my two favorite occupations, pastimes. And I was about, I guess, 8 or 9 years old. I changed school, and you've got to understand that this is a long time ago. And back then, comics to me meant British weekly newsstand comics, which tend to be war stories and that kind of stuff. And I made a new friend at this new school who used to draw these amazing pictures, and I'd never seen anything like them. And it's because he had started to read what the British reprints of Marvel comics. I'd never seen before. So his art was inspired by these amazing sort of Kirby Ditko images of stuff. And I was so inspired, we became friends. And he basically one day gave me a whole stack of British Marvel reprints that he had finished with, these, which I still have somewhere in an attic. And I read these things until they fell apart, because I'd never read anything like them. And it really solidified in my mind the idea of the two of the things that I loved doing most, which was writing and drawing, was something that had there was a sort of a form in which those two things were combined. So as a kid, I used to write and draw my own comics, and I did that for many years through my teens. And eventually, after university, I did a degree in English, and was interested in writing because I think my writing was stronger than my art. So another friend said, "You should get a job in comics. You're really interested in comics." And I didn't even know that was the thing you could do. So I wrote off to Marvel's London branch, Marvel UK's London branch, and they invited me in to have a chat with them. And I didn't realize they were advertising at the time for an editorial trainee. They did not realize at the time that I was not applying for a job. I was just writing to them. So I turned up, and there was a room full of candidates ready for interview, and they thought I was one of them, and I got the job. So I worked on stuff at Marvel UK on things like Ghostbusters and Transformers, and that's when I really began to learn how comic storytelling worked and how to work on essentially licensed characters. And from that point on, it was sort of that was it. That I sort of eventually went freelance, and I've been writing ever since. So there were these I suppose these key moments in my life. I sort of failed upwards. I don't know. I sort of fell into things by accident.
Yeah, it sounds like everything just kind of fell into place and just worked out for you. And that's awesome. Speaking of licensed Marvel characters, so you come onto Marvel and you take these kind of obscure characters that aren't even really connected to each other. You make them part of this team, Guardians of the Galaxy. How does that even come about? Was that totally your idea, or did Marvel say we'd like to bunch these characters together?
It was a combination of different things. I mean, by the time I was working on Guardians, I'd been working for Marvel US on and off, and DC as well, for probably the best part of 10, 15 years. So I'd worked on things like Punisher and West Coast Avengers and stuff like that. And they were trying to revive the kind of cosmic line. with the Annihilation event that Keith Giffen, who I admire enormously, was masterminding. And I was asked to write the Nova piece of it, and the Nova bit was very successful. And from that, I sort of got a chance to be more directly in charge of the then growing Cosmic line at Marvel. And the really interesting thing about Cosmic is, to say, going back to your original question, it appealed to me because of my science fiction interests. I love superheroes, but I love putting them into the context of science fiction, where it's almost like they're wearing a uniform rather than a costume and that kind of stuff. So this was stuff I loved, and I'd always loved it. And again, going back to an earlier bit, when I said I used to read these black and white Marvel reprints in the UK, that's my first introduction to Marvel Comics. They were things like Star Wars Weekly, as they called it over here, where they would serialize the American Marvel Star Wars strip and then put backups in. And they would obviously rummage around at the bottom of the bin to find the backups that would be remotely suitable for a science fiction comic. So they reprinted things like The Sword and the Star, which is the original appearance of Rocket Raccoon. They printed the Claremont Byrne Star-Lord, all sorts of things like that, which, you know, loads and loads of Jim Starlin stuff, so Warlock and Captain Marvel, which I adored. These comparatively minor things in the Marvel's output that had never been massively successful, and you say had sort of been brave attempts that had never really gone anywhere, were things that I'd grown up loving, really loving, more than mainstream Marvel stuff that I wasn't as familiar with. So when I got a chance to work on the Cosmic stuff, I said, let's use some of these characters that have never quite worked, but I think they're great. So I essentially we started to sort of put them together. I think the secret was putting them together in different combinations, like Rocket with Groot and things like that, to try and make something work. And we had an enormous amount of, I suppose, freedom, liberty, because the powers that be at Marvel didn't really think that Cosmic books were going to be very successful. And they also didn't really get why Cosmic books were interesting. There's no disrespect to them, but they loved the real money spinners, the sort of the mainstream Marvel terrestrial based superheroes. Yeah,
your Spider-Man, your X-Men.
Yeah, exactly. And with the Cosmic stuff, as long as we didn't scare the horses, it was like, well, you get on and do stuff. You can use these characters, you do anything you like with them, because they're not main characters that you can break. You can play around. So we sort of did that to the point at which we got something of a cult following on Guardians, I think, particularly, and Nova as well. And people seem to enjoy it. And I just loved working on those things and sort of bringing the references or bringing in new things and just trying to build that universe up, and sort of not just it to be sort of a random universe where things could happen, but with some sense of politics and geography, so that it was world built, like you construct a fictional planet or whatever. And then, of course, everything changed when to everyone's astonishment, they said, "Oh, they're gonna make a movie of it."
That's what I was gonna get to. That, like, when you find out they're gonna make a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, are you like, why, or did you already get it? Like,
no. I mean, it's not that I didn't think the story or the characters were good enough. It's just that this was comparatively early days in the Marvel cinema, and they'd obviously had a huge hits up to that point, and they just announced they were going to do that. I think to be honest, what they wanted to do was to see if they could do a science fiction movie rather than a superhero movie. I think they wanted something where they had a lot of freedom, and I think they also wanted something where, and this is just my guess, to be honest, but I think they almost wanted to see what would happen if they made something based on something that wasn't really already famous. So you've got the X-Men, you've got Iron Man or whatever, Captain America. But what happens if you take something that's a less obviously high-profile project? They
could have been very confident, because Iron Man wasn't really that popular of a character before the MCU. That was a risk in itself.
Yeah. I think so. But I think even on a comparative sliding scale, as a comic book fan, people have heard of Iron Man. They might not have heard of some things like that. So I think there was anyway. That's what they did. I think it was more than anything an attempt to add a science fiction flavor to their universe. They could set some stories in outer space. I think they had their grand scheme in mind.
And it worked, man. It totally opened up the cosmic universe. Now you have Thor joining them. Now you have what we had in the Avengers. You know, it's so funny to think of the butterfly effect that happened here. Had Marvel not reprinted these backup stories in their Marvel UK title,
there you go. Yeah,
it might not have led to your role in Annihilation. Might not have led to. It's one of the most successful and enjoyable movies of the MCU for me. I mean, I remember seeing the trailer. And when that music kicked on, I was like, what is this? I had no idea who these characters were.
I was going to say they always have a great sense of humor. But particularly Guardians obviously played it in that broad way. James Gunn did a brilliant job of sort of bringing that sort of sense of fun out there. And I think I think that's the great thing they did, is that each sort of movie or each strand of the movies has its own tone. Sort of there's the comparative serious sort of thriller-based stuff of, say, the Captain America movies, and you offset that with the sheer fun of, say, Ant-Man and or the wonder and spectacle of Guardians or Doctor Strange. And I think that's the great thing. It's not that although they are very strongly linked, all the films are very strongly linked by the DNA of Marvel. At the same time, you don't get the same thing every time. You get very, very different takes and flavors on stuff. So, it's very clever. But yes, it did astonish me at the time when I was told. I was told that by my equally astonished editor who'd just been told. He went, "You're never going to believe this." And I went, "What?" And we just were stunned. So, yeah. But it was. I got to visit the set. Got to meet them. I got to go to the premiere.
Awesome.
So great.
We have a great question for one of our members. How did you feel about the casting for Guardians?
I was delighted, and I think they work incredibly well. Really incredibly well. I write a lot of stuff, as you mentioned at the top of the show. I write a lot of comics for a lot of different companies. I write novels. I write all sorts of different things. And sometimes in my head, particularly with characters I've created, I've sort of mentally cast them just so I've got an idea of what sort of person it is. So it's not necessarily something I'd share with a reader, but it's just something to sort of for me to grasp onto, so that I can maintain consistency on a character. But sometimes characters are to me completely beyond casting. I have no idea who they'd be. They just are personalities that that sort of come into my head. So with Guardians, I hadn't cast these characters at all. And I didn't really know what to expect until the day I visited the set and actually met Chris Pratt and Zoe Saldana and Dave Bautista, who were all lovely, lovely, lovely people and were clearly greatly invested in it. And I actually was lucky enough to watch a sequence being filmed, and it was a really simple scene. But the way James Gunn worked it was to do the scene and then keep doing it over and over again, throwing little suggestions in. So it was like a 3-line scene with the ship was coming into crash land. 3-line scene. But they do a take and he go, "That was really funny. It was really funny when you did that. So can you do that a bit more? And what was it you said? You ad-libbed something, Chris. What was it you ad-libbed? Say that again, but say it." So he built it up. So by the end, the scene, although it achieved the same purpose that it had achieved in the original script, no longer resembled that at all. And was suddenly so funny that all 400 people standing around on set were laughing their heads off because it was so good. And he just sort of workshopped it as it went along until he got what he wanted. And I think that's an incredibly clever way of doing it. So I think the personalities that the actors bring to those characters, I think are great. They may not necessarily be exactly what I imagined when I wrote them, but I think they're the perfect screen versions. Do you see what I mean? I think they have interpreted them for a different medium in a way that works brilliantly well. So, I'm pretty happy with it.
That's awesome. And what a great experience to kind of see the process behind the scenes on how a director gets what he wants out of his actors. It really shows you the importance of their role in this. It's not like you said, just read the script and we're done. It's kind of like, that's awesome, man. Yeah.
Fascinating to watch.
We mentioned Annihilation, and Annihilation is such a great Nova story, and I think there's genius in not calling it Nova, right? Because that could turn some people off who maybe think they don't like Nova. But if you read this book, you're gonna love Nova.
That was always the problem. I think Nova's an interesting character. But Nova himself had never been massively successful. He'd never sort of hit the heights that as a character that Marvel, I think, had hoped for him.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I did with him deliberately, I was trying to think about how to try and make him make more of him. And I thought the problem is that from the reader's point of view, so outside the comic, the readers are looking at him going, yeah, but he's a kind of, D grade, he's not a Premier Division hero. And I thought, my God, wouldn't it be great if in the Marvel universe, Richard Rider is aware of that about himself. That is to say, he knows he's not up there with the big heroes, that he's regarded as a bit of an also-ran and this kind of stuff. So I started to play. So in other words, I made part of his personality and the way he regarded his own role as a hero, the way he is perceived outside the book by readers. And I think there was something tremendously honest about that, because there was a connection that people could identify with. So when he ends up, spoiler alert, it's a long time ago, but when he ends up much more powerful and returns to Earth, and he is really a major cosmic hero, and he turns up on Earth and encounters people like Iron Man. There was an opportunity for characters like Iron Man to go, wait a minute, you're Nova. It was that kind of revelation where they had to mentally recalibrate themselves to who he was now. And I was hoping along the way they would therefore take the reader with them. The reader would go, well, if Iron Man thinks he's an A-grade character, he's got to be an A-grade character. Do you see what I mean? So in other words, I tried to boost his popularity as a character by trying to show his efforts to do that in his fictional universe. And that to me is the fun part of it, is the idea that he's got to build in confidence and stop thinking about himself as a kind of also-ran.
Yeah, self-awareness is super important. You know, it almost reminds me of that's kind of what they did with Thor and Captain Marvel when he tried to be, hey, I like this one. It's kind of like, you guys should like her too. You know what I mean? So that's kind of interesting.
I like this one.
Yeah, and it's something that sometimes works really, really well. I actually experienced the same thing to a lesser extent, but to the same thing I did. Obviously, quite recently, I did quite a long run on Aquaman for DC. Now, I love Aquaman, the character, and I really enjoyed writing that. But again, there was always the perception that Aquaman was the member of the Justice League who was kind of the joke character. He just wasn't cool. Like, he wasn't part of the Trinity. He wasn't even Flash or Green Lantern. He was the fish guy, and therefore was sort of the butt of jokes. And I thought he shouldn't be, because he's a member of the Justice League. He's a core member of the Justice League, and he's tremendously powerful and really interesting. So I treated that book, even though it was underwater, as sort of a cosmic book where I was exploring an alien civilization. But I also, again, allowed the character to be aware of the fact that to surface dwellers, he was the joke, that they didn't take him seriously. He was the guy who talked to fish, and that was it. He was why is he in the Justice League?
Everyone thinks about that GIF from like the old cartoon where he's like standing on two fish or whatever.
Yes. Exactly. So I thought, again, it was an opportunity to try and change the opinion of the readership. I mean, there are plenty of readers who think Nova and Aquaman are great characters, obviously, but change the general opinion of the readership by allowing into the story the very prejudices that exist against the character, and to have Aquaman and Nova in their own different ways be kind of hurt by that and want to prove otherwise. And I think it is quite a useful thing to do, and it sort of appealed to me to try and have that awareness in, because at no point does Superman think to himself, people don't take me seriously, because he's Superman. You know what I mean? But with Aquaman, I think that's a distinct possibility. So yeah, that's maybe that's what it is. I almost always end up writing sort of underdogs or characters that people have forgotten about.
When I posted in our Facebook group that we were going to be doing this interview, there was a ton of comments and questions about Aquaman. Fans love your Aquaman, asking if would you ever revisit it? Is that something that you would even consider if you were given the opportunity again?
I absolutely would. Yes. I think when you write and this is true of the Marvel cosmic stuff, and it's true of things like Legion of Superheroes, which I wrote for essentially 5 years back in the 90s. These are characters that you spend so much time with that you can't help end up loving it. And it's always sort of feels really. So it's not just like, a run comes to an end and you're off the book and you go, oh well, I've got to find some more work. It's not just a kind of like the professional sense of that job is over. There's a sense of loss that you've been separated from a character that you were used on a monthly basis to working with and exploring. And sometimes it would take a long time to go back to those. For years, I said I would never return to Legion of Superheroes because it had been such hard work to do. But as time goes by, what you end up remembering is how much fun it was and how interesting it was and how many more things you could have done and how many new things you could do now that you've had a break and you're fresh and you can think of new things. So with all of those things, I would happily return, and I think I would bring a whole new cargo of ideas to it, because sort of no longer sort of suffering under the yoke of that monthly pressure. What's the next issue? What's the next issue? Where you sort of becomes very, very focused and narrow. That you can sort of broaden out and go, actually, with the benefit of distance, I'm going, I do this with it now, and I do this with it, and I know certain things about it now because I've done it once. It's like coming in and having some experience with that. So yeah, I'd love to. I loved working on particularly the Atlantean side of Aquaman, his mythos and lore. In the same way that I loved the sort of the universe building of the Marvel Cosmic. They're things that I think I was pretty good at, and therefore I'd love to have a chance to do some more of.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the Marvel Cosmic, where they're heading now, and there's so much speculation on what's the next big thing in the MCU. I wonder if Dan Abnett's comic luck will allow for another hit with the MCU adapting like Annihilation, or you could even go Annihilation and War of Kings now that we have X-Men.
Yeah.
And
I do think with Cosmic, just as a particular instance, I think that with the danger with Cosmic is because Cosmic is by very nature huge in scale. The temptation always is to therefore try and do the hugest possible thing you can do. You know, it's like the world's at stake. No, that's not big enough. Okay, the solar system. No, that's not big enough. The galaxy. No, the universe. No, the multiverse. Whatever. You know, it's going to be the end of time and creation or whatever. And you go, yeah. There comes a point where the reader is numb to that. It no longer, you know, it sounds dramatic, but I think you can still tell you could tell a great cosmic story that has the kind of personal, interpersonal dynamic of, say, a good Spider-Man story, and it happened to be set in space. There's nothing wrong with that. A cosmic story doesn't have to be about, it's time again this week for the universe to be under threat. Let's about it. I think some of the most compelling stories that I was part of in the Marvel Cosmic were about the political issues. They were about the the survival of the Inhumans royal family, and the personal odds and stakes, and how the political map would shift. The universe itself was massively stable, but what mattered was the lives of the people living in it, and how their lives could be changed completely if, I don't know, the Kree invaded the Skrull, or those sorts of things are really dynamic and interesting. Those are exactly the same stories you would tell on an Earthbound place, where you'd be trying to stop one of the Marvel fictional nations invading another one, because that would lead things to the brink of war. That's important and has a human content. And I think a lot of people back off from Cosmic because they think, that the humanity literally diminishes because they're all aliens, and then it goes even further because of the scale. And I never thought about that. Nova was a book about a guy. He happened to be in space. You know, that to me is what mattered. You cared about him, and therefore you cared about everything else.
Yeah, that's often with the Inhumans, right? It's not always a big cosmic battle. A lot of it is just like their own house having turmoil, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
War of Kings is the only thing that I can really remember where it was a big cosmic scale where they had to get involved. But that's a good point. Now, I'm not too familiar with the Warhammer stuff. I know that Warhammer, it's a tabletop game. There's a video game, but you did, what is it, like 40 novels for Warhammer?
I think it's in excess of 50, yeah.
50, yeah. Wow. So
I've been doing it for 25 years. Warhammer is one of those weird things. Warhammer 40,000, to give it official. There's Warhammer, which is fantasy, and Warhammer 40,000, which is the science fiction version. And it's been going for a long time now. It's an origin. It's a very British thing. And it's the sort of thing where if you talk to people, if they know it, they know it. They know exactly what you're talking about, because it is vast. It has a huge audience globally. But if you don't know it, you're kind of mystified by it because it sounds complicated and a bit weird. But Warhammer 40,000 is a game set in the year 40,000. It's the very far future. The tagline of the whole thing is in the darkness of the far future, there is only war. So as you're right in saying, it is originally, back in the late 80s when it was started, a tabletop war game using the most amazing miniature figures. And it was the sort of granddaddy of all those sorts of things. And it's an incredibly richly detailed Gothic universe. And I was familiar with it because I like playing role-playing games, so I knew sorts of things, and I was invited to pitch when they wanted to do some fiction based on it. And I've been working for them ever since. And like you said, I've written a lot of novels. I've had, I think, 8 or 9 New York Times bestsellers out of them. They're huge audience. My latest one, I'll plug it now, a book called Saturnine, which comes out in a couple of weeks' time, is the latest one, and it's my biggest one yet. It's part of the so-called Siege of Terror, so it's incredibly important. Fans who know that will be wetting themselves with excitement because of the series. That series of books the Horus Heresy series is so important. But other people are going, what the hell is that? We have no idea. Again, going back to your very, very first point, it is in its core, its genetics as an idea. I think it's very British. It's very dark. It's very satirical. It's an incredibly bleak, nihilistic, dystopian future. There are heroes, but they tend to be the heroes by dint of the fact they've survived, not because they're necessarily better than anybody else in the story. And it's about an incredibly rich Gothic universe where things are decaying and it's all very pseudo-medieval. I'm not selling it well, I can tell, but it's got this unique atmosphere. And And when I started writing novels for it, I realized that these miniatures are great and the background lore is great, but we needed to be able to identify it. Just like I said with Richard Rider and Nova and that kind of stuff, we needed to feel a connection with somebody human in the middle of it, so that everything else would work like that. So the novels I've written for them, at the heart of it, they're all about character. And they're all about people that you can identify with. One of the most popular series I write is a thing called Gaunt's Ghosts, which is now, I think, 15 books long, which is simply a regiment of regular human infantry who were moved from one war zone to another. And it's just a kind of military soap opera about their lives going through this terrible, terrible war zones. And then another series, which I'm just writing the latest one of now, is the Eisenhorn series, which is about an inquisitor who's basically a kind of supernatural secret policeman who investigates the sort of demonic crime that goes on in these things. And that is now on the verge of being turned into a Netflix or Amazon series, because we've got Frank Spotnitz, who made Man in High Castle, is working on it to turn it into a live action show. So this is, to me, and one of the reasons they want to do that is because Warhammer is that great undiscovered glory. Everyone's heard of Star Wars, everyone's heard of the Marvel Universe, everyone's heard of Doctor Who or Star Trek or whatever. Warhammer is, in terms of its fandom, just as big. It's just not public. So I think if we can start getting a Netflix series out there and that kind of stuff, people will go, what is this cool stuff? And it doesn't feel like anything else. It doesn't feel like a knockoff of Star Wars or anything like that. The nature of the universe is very different. So it's a very dear thing to me, and I am constantly grateful for the immense love that I get from fandom and the people who read these novels. And if you are watching this podcast, including you, and you go, what is he talking about? Go and try some. Because I bet you'd be surprised that you go, this doesn't look like my cup of tea, but you might go into. So I would say go and read Xenos, which is the first book in the Eisenhorn story, and see what you like. Because if you like that, you'll like it all. It's a great sort of entry-level drug to the Warhammer universe.
What's funny about Warhammer is that I've heard of it through numerous people, but for different things. People that were like, man, you got to see these little figures. They're so cool. There's a whole tabletop game. Then I've seen other people, man, this video game is awesome. We got to get into this game. And then when I posted in the group, everyone was like asking about the Warhammer novels. The Warhammer novels are awesome. So it's like, man, I'm hearing about this franchise from all different sources of media. And you're right. If it was on Netflix, then forget it. It would blow up, because it sounds like the biggest unknown franchise so far.
I think it is. Yeah. It's almost like a secret club. If you know it, you love it. And it's a really weird thing, because it's I've seen where there's a meme going around where they say, which most fans of whatever franchise would love to live in the universe that they love. So Marvel fans would love to live in the Marvel universe, and Star Trek fans would love to be part of the Federation, and Doctor Who fans would love to travel in the TARDIS along with the Doctor, and etc. 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 Warhammer fans would go, I do not want to live there. They just would not want to live there. It's a terrible, terrible place. But that makes it very interesting. There's a kind of bleakness to it that makes the heroism or the valor, the bravery, much more dramatic, and the scope is immense. Again, I try and anchor it with human people, but it's a very weird thing, and it seems to be my most multinational concern. I was going to say fans, but I've got readers in 20 different languages all around the world who email me and send me messages, and they want this, they ask that, and they want to know this, and when I go to a game stage, they have big conventions. Well, COVID permitting, they have big conventions around the world, and they're the only ones you go to where it is 20,000 fans who are just there for Warhammer. It's not like a Comic-Con where they're for all the comics generally. It's a specific love and a great interest in, and it gets brilliantly obsessive, and people will come and bring me. Show me. They'll either come dressed as characters that I've invented, or they will come as to show me the armies they've created based on my characters, or they'll even bring me, sort of painted miniatures they've customized. Here's one of my characters, and I've made this for you. So I have a glass case with my slowly assembling army of custom-made characters that people have brought me around. And that's fantastic. And you get told amazing stories. People with, for instance, with reading disabilities often have written to me, or I've met at conventions, and they say they they had dyslexia or dyspraxia or something like that, couldn't read books, but loved Warhammer so much that they essentially forced themselves to overcome their difficulty in order to read one of my novels. And it was the first novel they'd ever read, and it helped them then to go on and read, but it's because of their love of this universe. And that is a huge thing. I mean, that's a colossal thing to deal with. So I think there's it is a great untapped universe. Like you said, it's the big secret universe, and you know, we everyone's welcome. You just have to reach out and find us.
No, it sounds awesome. I mean, we have some people that are live with us now, and they're saying, man, they love the 40K universe. It seems daunting to get into it because it's so big, but you're saying start with that first novel, and then you'll jump in.
First novel. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not the only person who writes novels for them. There's some great authors writing in there, but everybody generally seems to agree that the first Eisenhorn novel, which is called Xenos, is a great jumping on point, because it sort of gives you the flavor. And although the lore of the universe is incredibly complicated, for the most part, you don't have to know it in specific detail until you become that kind of uber fan who's building his own RB, in which case you're going to do that voluntarily. It's a great jumping on point, because you could just get lost in the mystery of it and learn as you go along. And I think that's the important thing. And besides, we have this wonderful thing called the internet. So if you get lost, there are some great sites, Wikipedia type sites, which will answer any question and tell you, there's several really brilliant Warhammer sites where you can look something up, like, I don't know what this word means. Oh, it means that. And then you'll be lost. You'll be completely lost, because it's yeah, great.
So currently you're writing for Valiant. You're writing the ongoing series for RAI. Now, I jumped into Valiant with their reboot. I read every deluxe edition they had. RAI was one of my favorite ones. You have this kind of futuristic Bloodshot type character in this New Japan that's in the sky above this kind of post-apocalyptic Earth, and it's run by this AI father. So and RAI being kind of like the sun, or like the enforcer, and he kind of traverses through almost like it's the internet, right? Like he can kind of. So that run, I love that run. And then you grab the series after the fall of New Japan. Yeah, they're on the ground. He's got this little protege regime, and they're on this mission to kind of make sure that the AI father, there's no remnants of him left in any of these Earth cities. So how did this come about with you jumping onto RAI? Was it super important to know what happened prior? I mean, can you explain the process? Well, first of all, I am a sort of continuity addict. So whenever I get offered a job, I always try and go and do my due diligence and read up stuff so that I can make appropriate reference where reference is necessary. That's one of the reasons I got on, I suppose, so well with the Marvel Cosmic characters. But I'd written for Valiant back in the day, but a long time ago, on Shadow Man and Ninjak, a long time ago. And I've always admired the Valiant universe very much, and I just haven't worked for it very often. And it was the editor on RAI, Lisa, contacted me out of the blue and said, would you be interested in doing this book? And I was familiar with RAI as a character. I then immediately sat down and read all of Matt's run on the book, which I thought was terrific. And as you say, paints this. It's the future of the Valiant universe. Almost every other Valiant book is essentially present day, but RAI is sort of 2,000 years in the future. It's 4,000. Well, it's now 4002 AD. And you have this amazing utopian floating city of New Japan, ruled by the AI father. And then down below, as you put it, this post-apocalyptic Earth, which is genuine. But the apocalypse was so long ago, it's sort of now a wild Earth. It's sort of re-greened itself. The apocalypse was a long time ago, and what's left there is, well, nobody really knows, because it's things that have regrown, including technologies that have regrown and developed. So it's this kind of almost this wild garden of an Earth where almost anything's possible. And Matt had done a story which brought to the point where Father was taken down by RAI. RAI realizes that the Father is sort of despotic, tyrannical AI, and he sort of rises up against him. And the result is it crashes New Japan. And it wasn't easy for RAI. It wasn't in him to rebel.
He has to learn to rebel. He has to go against his programming. He has to be to betray his father and all this kind of stuff. So Lisa said, what we're going to do for this new series is him on a sort of quest across this strange new world, which no one has written about in any great detail. So world building involved.
It's like a wasteland type of Earth.
But we want to establish the range of it and how weird and wild it can be. So it's a very simple story. He's hunting for the offspring, which are the sort of backup programs of Father, so Father can't recombine. Right. And she goes, that's it, and it's going to come out of this event called Fallen World, which is the sort of the big event book that details the sort of the defeat of Father and all this kind of stuff. And I went, fine. So I started work on it. I was really enjoying it because as she pointed out, it was incredibly simple. It was good to know all that continuity, but you don't have to know it to understand the book. The book has a very simple story of a warrior on a quest, and he's got, as you say, this companion, Rajin, who is an earlier prototype of the same sort of synthetic creature that Rai is, and actually, therefore, is technically his older brother, even though he's a kid.
Right.
Looks like a kid. So you got this odd relationship, and they're on this quest. And over the first few issues, which I wanted to make sort of feel a little bit standalone, I wanted to explore is set up how very different parts of the world could be. So we get a sort of post-apocalypse fight in the first one, and then we get this weird, eerie second issue, and then we get this third stuff where we got sort of positronic dinosaurs on the loose and all sorts of different things. And I was several issues in when Lisa said, actually, we love what you're doing. Would you actually like to write the Fallen World event that this comes out of? So I went backwards and wrote my own foundation for the story because it was already mapped out what they were going to do with it. So that's what I was writing up. But I actually got to sort of frame up the prologue to where I was going with this series. And we've been doing it ever since. And I find it a remarkably entertaining world because on the one hand, I love writing in an established universe. I love picking up all the threads and connecting things together and doing all that continuity research and everything like that. I just love that. On the other hand, I love the freedom of world building and doing something completely creative and new. And Rai is this great synthesis of the two because there is continuity to observe. In particularly, I want to flesh out the idea that this is the future of an established universe, so we can see those connections. We can see characters or versions of characters recurring. But at the same time, it was all virgin territory to be developed and exploited, and so I had this creative freedom, which you don't often get when you're working at, say, Marvel or DC. Quite often, you're writing a book that is one of a number of interconnected books, and you've got to double check with everybody else that they're not stepping on each other's toes. But with this, I wasn't bumping into anybody, and it was it has been a great experience that I've really loved, and I love the response to it. We've got a great artist on it, and for those of you watching this who've not read Rai yet, we went on hiatus when the pandemic lockdown began. So we had 5 issues out of that point, and that was the first major arc. But Rai issue 6 will return in August. And at the same time that the next issue returns, start a great jumping on point because the start of another arc. We also bring out the trade of the first 5 alongside it.
Dan, you're on point because I was going to plug it myself. Yeah, you can pre-order the trade paperback right now. It's issues 1 through 5, and issue 6 you can pre-order so that you can get all caught up. It will enrich in the experience if you read the prior volume, but like Dan said, you don't have to. You could jump right in. Rai is one of my favorite characters out of the Valiant universe, and it's interesting. Like you said, it is a shared universe. It's very much a superhero shared universe, but this one's unique in the sense that it's the only one that takes place in the year 4002. So, like, it doesn't really mix with the other franchises, but maybe you'll see Exo armor on the floor somewhere in the future or something like that. You know.
Exactly, we've got some of those connections going on with it. In the first few issues that we meet things that are clearly, at the very least, related to things that we know from the present day universe, and it's that future extrapolation. It's that sense that this is the same place, just a little bit longer afterwards. And I think that's a really exciting thing to do. And the Valiant universe, to me, is beautifully designed in terms of the way it's sort of its central premises, its central concepts work, like its technologies. So that when you start to try and build a future extension to it, which is what I'm doing, there's sort of logic dictates that certain things will be there and will work in particular ways. So the big villain that he's up against is, and this is a spoiler, but is essentially Bloodshot, the hero from the present day. But it's the Bloodshot technology being used by something else.
It always seems like he's a futuristic version of Bloodshot, a more advanced version. And it was teased in the prior run in like one panel. And I was like, they never kind of revisited that. And I was like, man, where's the connection with Bloodshot and Rai? But it sounds like we might be visiting that in the new arc, which is awesome.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, there are loads of lovely finesse connections there. And there's just sort of mirroring in it as well. I've just described, as you did, Rai traveling this world with his his kind of junior companion Raijin. So they're a kind of double act. And it seemed to me very logical that the Eternal Warrior would exist in this futuristic universe as well, because in the first arc, he meets the Eternal Warrior, who is also, of course, traveling around as the mentor and protector of a junior ward, in this case, the Geomancer. So they're very, very similar in the way that the two of them sort of like traveling companions moving around the Earth on their quests, yet have completely different ways of looking at the world and what their objectives should be. And that, to me, is really interesting, because rather than sort of getting tied up in the obvious similarities, you get to play with the really dramatic differences, and that all comes from character again. That all comes from who they are as people and what they are and what they need and what they're looking for.
Yeah, the showdown with the Eternal Warrior was awesome, and I loved the Eternal Warrior run where they described and explained what happens when he dies and how he chooses to come back. Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Man, Dan, thank you so much. This was amazing. I love to hear about these things, and I'm super interested in Warhammer 40k now, man. That's something that, man, I wish I would have found out about it at the beginning of quarantine. I could have really dived in. But I really want to thank Greg over at Valiant for setting up the interview, and I really hope you guys jump on RAI. I read it and I review it weekly as it comes out, so it's something I'm reading. I definitely enjoy it. And as much as you can get into that shared Valiant universe, I think it's a nice difference, because it's not the big two, but it's still superheroes. You know, a lot of times with indie books, it's not superheroes. It's very environmental or situational. But this one is heroes and villains. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff there. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that with us. You guys can pre-order that trade and that single issue number 6 now. Dan, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this stuff with us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for the great questions. I look forward to seeing everybody around the time that RAI comes out in August, and I also hope to see a few of you in the Warhammer universe. And don't worry, it's a bit scary to begin with. I think stories, escapism, science fiction, superheroes, they offer us a great escape. And they always have done, and particularly in the world as we've discovered it in 2020, when escape is something we could all do with, that it is a great thing to do. And even though lockdown is easing in certain places, I think looking for consolation and entertainment in the form of books and comics is a worthwhile thing to do. So if this podcast and others like it introduce you to things you've never tried, go ahead and try them. And in doing so, you can support your local comic shops, because let's face it, they're having a tough time too, and we need them in order to get the good stuff that we want to read every month. So support your comic shops, order stuff, order RAI, whatever. But that's great. I'd love it if you did. But mainly to get those comic shops to give them your custom and escape into different universes, some of which are weird.
The weirder, the better. I might get in trouble. You might see me next time with a bunch of Warhammer figures.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Dan, where can people follow you? Where can they find you on social media? Or
well, I am on Twitter, but I'm not a great user of Twitter, because I've become as degraded from its original great high wonderfulness. But I can be found in various different places. I am on Instagram. I don't post as much as I should do, but I'm trying to, and I'm getting people. So I'm Dabnett, D Abnett on Instagram. By all means, come along and encourage me to post more. But weirdly, of all the different social media that still sort of work for me, is Facebook, of all things. And I have a Facebook account as Dan Abnett, which I've had for since there was a Facebook. And it reached its friend limit quite a while ago. But rather than just converting to a public figure page, I opened a second Facebook page as Daniel Abnett, where I essentially post the same thing. So I now have these two things. The Daniel Abnett page is the one that's more likely to have slots left, although that is also now reaching its limit. So I think the time has come over the next month or so where I will sort of evolve one of them into a public figure page, where I don't have the same number of. I've always found that a bit kind of arrogant. Oh, look at me, I'm a public figure. But just so I can have a relaxation of the limits on the number of people who can come along and follow and friend, because I like to run the pages like that, because it gives me no chance to have conversations with people, direct message. Usually people could just message me a question, and it seems to work very well. Having said that, this podcast will go out, I'll then have 10,000 new people, and at the moment that's the best place, and I'm hoping in the next month or so that the sort of the fan page, the public figure page, will be the best single place to go and find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate everybody who's watching live for our members, and then anyone who's watching on the replay. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, hit the like button. Make sure to follow Dan on Facebook and bug him on Instagram to post some more. And thanks for watching. You guys stay minty fresh.